Hello, my friends. How are you? Just adjusting the camera so we're all in the clear so you can see me, hear me. Continuing our conversation in this whole series of how we transform from human to meta-human. Meta means beyond, and human in this case means the conditioned human mind. So I have been in a very interesting email ecosystem of philosophers, scientists, and others who are engaged in exploring the deep mystery of existence. And something came up today that triggered the intention to talk about today's topic. And the topic has to do with fundamental identity. And what is the meaning of the word I? Who or what do we mean when we say I? And who or what is it that wants to know what I is? What is I? So, if I ask you just right now, where are you? You will probably say, at least most people would say, I'm here. So I is somewhere here, and that which we call the other is somewhere there. That's our common experience of what is I. If I asked you, where are you having the experience of seeing me, you might say in your eyes or in your brain. Or you might say, I am having the experience of seeing you. But you are wherever you are, Alaska or Tibet or Miami or Michigan. And yet you are having the experience of seeing me. So where is that experience happening? You might say it's happening on your handheld device, on your iPhone. But actually no. All that's appearing in your iPhone or handheld device or Android is a digital code of photons. All that's coming to your eyes is also invisible photons. All that's going to your brain is also an action potential, a plus-minus charge of, you might say, electrons. And all that's happening in your brain is electrochemistry. But you're having the experience of seeing me. That experience of seeing me and hearing me is happening in your consciousness, in your awareness, right this moment. So people say, no, but that can't be so. If I stub my toe, then the pain is in my toe. If I stub my toe on a nail and then I experience the pain seems to be localized in my toe. But actually, your pain is in awareness, but it is being projected to the toe. In fact, even the toe is being projected by awareness as a perceptual experience, as is the nail. So the nail is a projection of awareness as a perceptual activity. The toe is a projection of awareness as a perceptual activity, and the pain is also an experience in awareness projected to the toe. The brain itself, by the way, does not feel pain. So I'm reading this very interesting book. It's from a long time ago. I just, was cleaning my bookshelf and I found this book. It's called The Secret Language of the Mind, A Visual Inquiry into the Mysteries of Consciousness. The author is David Cohen. A couple of things here that are very interesting that I made notes of. So let me share my notes with you. So here's something that this author says. There are no neurons within the brain that provide sensory information about brain activity. This means that literally we cannot physically sense what we are thinking. Introspection is not objectively measurable or verifiable. The brain cannot sense its own activity. The content of thought during introspection cannot be physically detected. On and on. Of course, you can see neural correlates in the brain that correspond to what you're thinking, but the neural correlates are obviously also an experience in consciousness. The brain as a perceptual object is also an experience in consciousness. So a perceived object cannot produce the perceiver. Any perceived object cannot be the source of perception. Any object seen cannot be the source of the seer. Once again, any object seen cannot be the source of the seer. In fact, the activity of seeing, which we call eyes, is born and dies in every moment. Your eyes are the activity of seeing. And actually, although they seem to be anatomical, they're actually a process. And that process is the very modality of seeing. The eyes are the symbolic representation of seeing. And in every act of seeing, please listen carefully, in every act of seeing, a new seer and a new scenery is born. And the previous act of seeing actually is gone. Therefore, the previous seer and the scenery is also gone. The previous seer and the scenery is also gone. Now, of course, when we say, where are you? You say, I am here. But, if we go inside your body, go inside your brain, there's no one to be found. There's no little homunculus sitting somewhere behind my frontal cortex, looking out through these eyes at the world. So there is no seer in the brain or in the body. No seer in the brain or the body. No, everybody talks about, these days anyway, out-of-body experiences. And I've said many times before that the great mystery is that we have an in-body experience without being inside the body. Now, Om Bansal is making a comment here, the seer is constant. Well, with a caveat, okay? The personal seer is not constant. It is born and dies and is recreated in every act of seeing. Om Bansal says, is seer not awareness? The ultimate seer is awareness that produces in every snapshot of seeing the provisional seer as a body-mind and the provisional scenery as the appearance of form and phenomena. Okay, so there are two seers. Okay, one is the non-provisional seer, which is non-local awareness, experiencing itself as the provisional body-mind, as the seer, and the provisional appearance, perceptual activity, as the scenery or that which is seen. So in every act of seeing, a new seer and a new scenery is created. and both are provisional. Okay, this is what we call jiva, Atman, with its own sanskaras and filters, and its own filters as the conditioned mind that create through false perception an identity of a provisional seer squeezed into the volume of a body in the span of a lifetime. But of course, if we understand that awareness is the original seer, then that awareness has no borders, it has no boundaries, it has no form, it is without cause, it is irreducible, and it is constantly modifying itself as seer and scenery. In every act of perception, a new perceiver and a new perceived. All experience is constructed. Visual experience is a construction of entangled qualia. And depending on how these entangled qualia are integrated as a particular appearance and how they are interpreted, that reifies the experience in consciousness, which is just bubbling qualia, but given meaning, it reifies the experience as the object of experience, or even what we call an observer-independent object. But that by itself is a contradiction. How can you have an observer-independent object? The very idea of anything existing implies the existence of awareness. Okay, how do you know anything exists? How do you know this exists, or that painting exists, or this coffee cup exists, or this hand exists, or this body exists, or this shirt exists, or this book exists? And it exists because of an awareness of its existence. And the awareness of its existence is actually a modified activity of the awareness itself, as perception, as cognition, as interpretation. So you see, based on very limited, narrow bandwidths of perceptual activity, which are species specific, as I've said many times before, narrow bandwidths of species specific perceptual activity, which are also unreliable. So, in my email circle this morning, I had said all perception is unreliable. And there was an objection by one of my peers. He said, not all perception, but some perception is misleading. But that's not true. All perception is misleading. All perception. First of all, it's fragmented. Secondly, it hides the truth. So, if you listen to my friend Donald Hoffman, who is a cognitive neuroscientist at UC California in Irvine, he says that perception hides the truth. And in fact, if we knew the truth, then as biological organisms, we wouldn't survive. My perceptions tell me, as I've said, the earth is flat, but no one believes that anymore. It's spinning at dizzying speeds and hurtling through space at thousands of miles an hour. My perceptions tell me that the earth is flat, and we know it's not, and on and on. My perceptions tell me that things are solid, and we know everything is proportionately as void as intergalactic space. So perceptions are useful lies, and they are useful lies because they help the biological organism, which is also a perception, and therefore an unreliable perception. The biological organism is this anatomical structure, but we know that the biological organism is also a process that we only know as changing intermittent stream of perceptions and sensations that we call the anatomical body. But there is no such thing. The anatomical body is a limited perception, and in our case, it's limited perception based on the limitations of our biology, our biological apparatus, which is the instrument of experience, okay? The instrument of experience. But it is by itself, the biological organism is also an experience. As I've said, no perceived object can be the source of perception. No object seen cannot be the source of seeing. So actually seeing and perceiving are the way the inconceivable and non-perceivable, non-local, irreducible, formless, infinite consciousness creates both the seer and the scenery. So the local observer is an artifact. It's not in the body. And the non-local observer is the only observer. And as a drop in the ocean of that non-local consciousness, you as a conscious agent or a soul are experiencing itself through the filter of the conditioned mind as a body mind and a world, as both the seer and the scenery that constantly evolves over time. So the provisional seer is constantly evolving, and the absolute seer is actually the witness in which the seeing, the scenery, and the seer, the provisional seers, are all born simultaneously. Okay, I'm looking at this wonderful book that I mentioned before, and looking at some of my notes here, which are saying the same thing, but I made these notes a long time ago. So let me see if there's something else that I want to say. Here are some more notes. Billions of nerve cells and trillions of synapses go on and off as switches, and they actually produce or are correlated, don't produce, with experience. But no biological phenomenon can explain an experience. No biological phenomenon can explain an experience, because the biological process itself is an experience. The body itself is an experience. The mind itself is an experience. The world itself is an experience. The brain itself is an experience. So when you slowly go past the secret passages, the dark alleys, the ghost-filled attics of your mind, go deep down into the rabbit hole, you discover your infinite being that is at this moment experiencing a localized seer, a localized seeing, and a localized scenery, all as a result of misleading perceptions. That's it. So all perceptions are misleading. All perceptions are misleading. There is no perception that is accurate, okay? Because obviously it's a narrow band of perceptual activity within an infinite ranges of possibilities. So the only true self is always infinite possibilities, always non-locally correlated, synchronistic, always infinitely creative, always unpredictable, and always the original source of attention and intention, taking snapshots of itself as mind, body, and the world. So, what is reality? The only reality, which is absolute, is that which can't be perceived, but which is responsible for all perception. The only reality is that which can't be conceived, but is responsible for every concept. And these concepts and perceptions, which are all provisional, are human stories for the bubbling of qualia in the field of non-local, borderless, acausal, irreducible, spaceless, timeless, imperceivable, non-conceptualizable, fundamental being that you are. Our journey through cosmic time is to understand the unreliability of our perceptions, but also understand that they are useful for navigating experience as body-mind instruments in the field of Leela, the playground of the universe. So I was looking at some of the objections of my peers, and I think the whole objection comes from this false construct of I being in the body, because I being formless can't be contained, has no container. In fact, all containers are in the borderless, formless, infinite, inconceivable, non-conceptualizable I. The I that is the source of all modes of knowing in every species, all modes of experience in every species, and therefore all modes of knowing giving different experiences of what we call the known. The scenery, the seer, and the seeing are a single process. And of them all, the most fundamental is just the seeing, the perceiving. When I say seeing, seeing allows and generates the scenery. And the scenery in our case is three-dimensional theater of space-time and causality, but that's just the construction of stereoscopic vision, which is a construction, literally construction of appearance visually. And similarly, all experience, all perceptual experience is a construction, a learned phenomenon, unreliable but very useful as long as we identify with body, mind, and world. But once you realize that body, mind, and world are just an intermittent stream of sensations and perceptions constantly constructing the experience of body, mind, and world, then the shift in identity is actually a shift from the body-mind as I to the awareness in which the body-mind and the world are a unified experience. Okay? Unified experience. So, what is the point of knowing all this? The point of knowing all this, once again, is not so you can pay your mortgage or buy a new car or, even read a new book, by the way. There's something very interesting there was in this book in which which I said is a long time ago. It says, every perception is a reconstruction of memory. Perception depends on attention. Attention is a quality of consciousness. Consciousness also is where we experience the brain. And our expectations determine perception as well. So how unreliable is this Maya, this illusion? And it's a fun illusion, except when people start to experience old age, infirmity, and death. Let me read one more sentence from here, from this book. Perception allows us to interpret a visual pattern of lines and curves on the retina of our eyes or as a rose, or the particular mode of vibration of the sensory hairs in our inner ear as the sound of a cello. So how does that happen? It doesn't. It's a wrong idea. It's the perception is generated as the cilia, the vibration of those cilia, the crisscrossing of the lines, the form and the phenomena are generated. So people are asking, what book is that? It's an old book, The Secret Language of the Mind, a visual inquiry into the mysteries of consciousness. So, okay, we just now, final point here. What's the point of all this? Well, the Eastern wisdom traditions say that all our suffering comes from a distortion of reality. Number one, we confuse ourselves with the experience that is constantly changing, which we call the body-mind. We are not the body-mind. We are the awareness in which the body-mind is an experience. So that's the first cause of suffering, which leads to the second cause of suffering. These are called the 5 kleshas: grasping and clinging at snapshots of perceptual activity, which we call reality, which is the second cause of suffering, the second klesha. The third cause of suffering is being afraid of the impermanence, because the perceptual snapshots cannot be held on to, okay? And so being afraid of impermanence, and also clinging and grasping, and a revulsion of unpleasant snapshots of perceptual activity. And finally, the fear of death, which is based on the false construct that I'm a body-mind. So you see, all these 5 causes of suffering come from confusing perceived experience as fundamental reality. Now, of course, perceived experience feels real, as it should. Otherwise, what would be the point of experience at all? It feels real, as it should, but when it comes to knowing who we are, what we are, then we need to dive deeper. What is it that wants to know itself? And how does it know itself? And what is it that wants to know itself is awareness, the jiva, the atman, the soul, the conscious agent. And how does it know itself? By generating experience. And that experience generates both the provisional seer and the provisional scenery. And actually, the provisional seer and the provisional scenery is actually just awareness seeing itself. So I hope that makes sense, and I hope that sets you off on a journey of choiceless awareness, subtle intention, no anticipation, no resistance, no regrets, just this beautiful, eternal, timeless moment as it is, producing everything: the seeing, the scenery, the seer, the knower, the knowing, the known, the observer, observation and that which is observed. You are that. The whole universe exists inside of you. Just knowing that. Those beautiful poems of Tagore. I look into your eyes and see the whole universe not yet born. I look into your eyes and see the whole universe not yet born. Or Rumi, I am so small, how can this whole universe be inside of me? But you're not small, you're infinite and borderless. Rumi says, look at your eyes, they're so small, and that they see enormous things. You know, the snapshots between perception is what we call space. So you look at this snapshot of perception, this snapshot, and this is actually space. But that space is imbued with awareness because it is that which is taking a snapshot of itself as this, the painting, this, and everything else. Okay? So the space between thoughts, the space between objects, which are perceptual snapshots, the space between breath, the space between intention, the space between attention, the space between images, the space between any experience is the same infinite space. So, and that's the space of consciousness. And the objects in that space are also modifications of consciousness. That's all there is. Okay. Chit Akash. Chit means knowing. Akash, the infinite space of knowing, in which all knowers, known and knowing, is born and dies in an eternal now. Yes, the space between every word is the same space. So the space knows itself both as the space and the objects generated in this space through its own self-interaction. The space is not an empty void, it's the womb of creation, where nature goes to exactly the same place to create a galaxy of stars, a cluster of nebulas, a rainforest, a human body, or a thought. Why? Because a thought, a human body, a rainforest, a galaxy, an image, a feeling, a perception are all modified forms of awareness experiencing itself in timeless now. And we are that. Aham Brahmasmi. Thank you.